My earliest memory of politics was from 1992. I was only 6 years old, but for my elementary school class of U.S. Civics or Social Studies, I think it was, we were supposed to do a mock election. Everyone in the school was going to vote for the president, and we would see who the school voted for. At the time, the choices were between incumbent George H.W. Bush or the new challenger, Bill Clinton. And I did not know who to vote for, so when I got home, I asked my mom, who are we rooting for? Who do we want to win the election? And she told me something to the effect of, your father and I are Republicans, so we want George Bush to win. And so, of course, me being 6 years old and trusting my parents, I said, okay, I also want George Bush to win then. And so the next day I went to school, I voted for George H.W. Bush, all the other kids voted as well, and the ballots were counted, and at the end of the day, George Bush won the school with 60-something% of the vote, and cheers went up, yay, George Bush won! Of course, this wasn't the real election, they were just teaching us how elections work, at least in theory. And so our next assignment was to take home a map of the United States, and then after the election happens, we fill in the states based on who won those states. So you'd color in different states blue or red, depending on who won. And I remember that I stayed up pretty late coloring in those states. It wasn't fully counted by the time I went to bed around 9 o'clock, so in the morning I woke up and I finished coloring in the map. And to my dismay, I was saddened to learn that George Bush lost and Bill Clinton won. I didn't quite understand why that was the case. If my parents wanted George Bush to win, and everyone in the school seemed to want George Bush to win, how come Bill Clinton won? I didn't get it. And I didn't think about politics for many more years. The 1996 election, the only thing I remember is the Simpsons Halloween special where Bill Clinton and Bob Dole are abducted by aliens. That's all I remember from that election. I wasn't really paying attention, but I didn't have to, because again, I wasn't even voting age. And then we had the election from the year 2000, where it was George W. Bush versus Al Gore, and that was a complete mess, of course. I was certainly aware that no one knew who the president was for 2 months. Who was the president-elect? We have no idea. So, that was ridiculous. But again, I couldn't vote in that election either, too young still. And then we had September 11th happen, and then we went to wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, and it was all the fallout of how we were lied into some of those wars. The weapons of mass destruction did not actually exist. It was fabricated. And, the tax cuts for the rich, Protection of Marriage Act to discriminate against homosexuals. It was not a great couple of years. I did not really enjoy the first George W. Bush presidency. And 2004 was the first time I was eligible to vote, so I was thinking about it. But I couldn't say that I voted for John Kerry. John Kerry did not seem particularly charismatic to me. And of course, I know now that charisma isn't the most important thing to have. Competency is very important too. But, it was my first election. I was still a young, dumb teenager. I didn't vote. I want to emphasize my upbringing was very conservative. I went to a private Christian school, elementary, middle, and high schools. I went to church, I went to Sunday school, I went to catechism, I went to youth group, I went to cadets, which is like the church's version of Boy Scouts. I was really inundated, I was really in this conservative Christian mindset. My parents were Christian conservatives, as were my grandparents. My friends were, my friends' parents were. Everybody I knew was Christian conservative. But it was around this time, around 2004, with the George Bush-John Kerry election and the Iraq War, that I started to pay a bit more attention to world events, U.S. politics. I started watching The Daily Show with Jon Stewart on Comedy Central, and then later on The Colbert Report as well. It was really the only way I could pay attention to politics without being bored out of my mind. I wouldn't say that all those shows turned me into a progressive or a leftist or a liberal, but they did make me realize that it was okay to make fun of dumb conservatives. And if your Republican representative is being a piece of crap, you can go ahead and call him a piece of crap, There used to be a saying, and it still persists to this day, that both sides are the same. And that's not true. I know that now. But I think back then I needed to have something like that to jump to. Going from Republicans good to Democrats good is a pretty big jump to make, but going from Republicans good to everybody sucks, that's a bit easier. It's a good step towards it. But yeah, the second term of George W. Bush was a complete catastrophe. The wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, there was the Defense of Marriage Act, and I remember back then, I wasn't gay, and I didn't even know anyone who was gay, but I was starting to realize that this is kind of bullshit how you keep on discriminating against gay people. So I was watching one by one, the states would legalize gay marriage, and I'd be cheering every single time. I remember Minnesota, the 30th state or something like that, and I'd be like, yeah, Minnesota, oh, yeah. I was really into it, just watching these states tick one by one until finally the whole thing was legalized. It was fun to watch that. But then we had the economic recession, the Great Recession. The bubble burst, giving tax dollars to the billionaires didn't actually help the economy all that well. And we all went into a very bad place. My mother lost her house. A lot of people suffered. A lot of people went bankrupt, got foreclosed upon. It was absolutely miserable. So, I didn't think John McCain really had that much of a chance in 2008. We all needed change. Barack Obama knew that. And for the first time in my life, I voted for the Democratic candidate. I voted for Barack Obama. I don't remember if I filled out the rest of the ballot, but I know I voted for him, and I was happy he won, because I was not happy with the state of the country at that time. And then the honeymoon period started to wear off. He was still good. He was okay, but he wasn't exciting as much anymore. I wasn't particularly a fan of the drone strikes. The war kept on going. We voted for change. Why is there still the war going on? Why are all my friends and family members still deployed and being sent out? What's going on? Why aren't we getting enough change? So 2012 rolls around, and it's Barack Obama versus Mitt Romney, and I didn't like either of them. I think I liked Mitt Romney a lot less. He seemed very skeezy. Did not like the way he was clearly in the pocket of the billionaires. He could not hide that nearly as well as he needed to. So he lost the election. I ended up voting third party, and I just wasn't happy with Barack Obama, but I still wanted Mitt Romney to lose. I was happy that Mitt Romney lost, but I didn't care enough to vote for Barack Obama a second time. Just, if he wins, great. If he doesn't, well, should have been a better candidate, I guess. And then we hit 2016, and it's kind of an open field for both Democrats and Republicans. Who's going to be the nominee? Nobody knows. And the Republicans ultimately settle on Donald Trump, and okay, that's a choice. Sure, he's a complete buffoon, a bit of a giant idiot, but if that's your candidate, sure. What do we got on the Democratic side? Who's Bernie Sanders? I've never heard of this person before. Let me listen to this person. Let me hear what he's got to say. I like what I'm hearing. Yeah, I was really excited for Bernie Sanders. I had never been excited about voting in a primary ever before. I wasn't really into politics all that much for most of my life, but I listened to what Bernie Sanders was saying, and it made a lot of sense, and I was really excited, and he seemed like the first presidential candidate that motivated me. I was excited, actually. I guess I was somewhat excited for Barack Obama, but it was more of I was excited for change. This was a candidate I wanted to win. I wanted to see Bernie Sanders win, so I supported him in the primary. Not just supported him with my primary vote, I donated to him. The first presidential campaign, the first political campaign I had ever donated money to. I wanted to see him win. I phone banked. I have no idea if phone banking is useful, but he seemed to want people to phone bank for him. He thought that was useful, so I did it. I called random strangers on the phone to talk to them about politics. That's not an appealing thing to do. That's not a thing anyone wants to do, but I wanted to see Bernie Sanders win, so I did it. And the entire time the primary was going on, it felt like he was up against so many forces that were trying to keep him down. Hillary Clinton, just a pawn of the establishment. I did not want to see her win. I wanted Bernie Sanders so much. My friends all wanted Bernie Sanders to win. My friend group, everyone wanted Bernie Sanders. Everyone I knew that talked to me about politics wanted Bernie Sanders to win. And then he lost the primary, and we got stuck with Hillary Clinton versus Donald Trump. Blah. I remember my dad and I were in the truck driving somewhere, and he had been a conservative all of his life, really. And he had known that I had started to lean a bit more to the left, and we were okay with that. We were still on good terms. You know, I love my dad. He loves me. And I remember we were driving somewhere. He was in the driver's seat. I was in the passenger seat. And he said something to the effect of, you know, I've been voting Republican all of my life, but Donald Trump, I don't think I can support Donald Trump. I think I hate Donald Trump so much, I might vote for Hillary Clinton. And I told him, wow, Dad, that's crazy. Because I hate Hillary Clinton so much, I might vote for Donald Trump. It was an election where it seemed like nobody was happy. At the end of the day, I ended up just not voting. I didn't even bother voting third party. At this point, I realized that third party candidates cannot win elections like this. I didn't want to see either of those people being my president. And I really couldn't stop it from happening. One of them was going to be my president, so whatever. I didn't vote. A lot of my friends voted third party. Rand Paul, I think, may have been on the ballot. Someone like that, some libertarian. A lot of my friends voted libertarian. We all kind of assumed Hillary Clinton would win, and then surprise, surprise, she did not. And we had President-elect Donald Trump. And I knew it was not going to be a good time. I knew Trump was going to be a bad president. But for the first couple of weeks, I said, you know, he's not going to be a good president, but he's already done something good for this country. He stopped Hillary Clinton from becoming president. That was a joke I would tell all the time. That was my go-to joke. The joke lasted for a little bit, yeah. And then I realized eventually that, you know, I kind of wish we had Hillary Clinton instead. This is not good. Somehow this is so much worse than I thought it was going to be. There was so much bad crap happening in those 4 years that it's difficult for me to remember all of them off the top of my head. I have to remember that, he wanted to shoot protesters. He wanted to shoot them in the legs. You had government officials testifying that, yeah, he's a real dumb piece of shit. He should not be president. He sucks. And then he got impeached for trying to manipulate the election with Ukraine and blackmailing other nations. This guy was such a piece of shit. After 8 years of George W. Bush, I said, wow, I am never going to vote for a Republican, probably for the rest of my life. And after 4 years of Donald Trump, I thought, I have to vote Democrat in every election for the rest of my life because clearly the Republican Party is irresponsible and cannot be allowed to hold this kind of power. If this is the best they can offer us and they don't speak out and they don't stand up to him when he clearly does things that are indefensible, I cannot allow Republicans to win. I have to stop as much as I can because it's awful. And then you had the 2020 election with Biden versus Trump. I was rooting for Sanders still, you know, in the primaries. I was really hoping that Bernie Sanders could finally be president, but we got stuck with Biden, and I bit the bullet, and I voted for Biden, and he won, and you know, he was a little more progressive during his term than I was expecting. That's good. Donald Trump launched an insurrection. That's bad. For a moment, it seemed like our country was going to finally snap back into reality, but a couple days later, and things were right back to where they were. And it was 4 years of Biden being president, but it was also 5 years of feeling like Donald Trump was president because he was able to use the bully pulpit a lot more successfully. He wasn't president, but you certainly heard a lot more about him than Biden. Biden was not the front-facing candidate he needed to be. The Biden presidency felt like 4 years of watching a slow-moving train approach you. You can see it coming. You're trying to get people out of the way, tell them to stop. This is going to be a catastrophe. As it's very clear that Donald Trump is not being held accountable for his actions. He's gaining more support. He's gaining more power. people are getting a little disappointed in how you're handling the election. He's clearly going to be on the ballot despite the fact that he launched an insurrection. So 2024, he's coming. The Supreme Court just said that presidents have basic immunity. Are you going to maybe push that a little bit, Biden? You're going to try and make them rule against you? You're going to try to make them put some restraints on that newfound power? Or are you just going to hand that immediately over to Trump with nothing? Nothing? No, nothing? Okay. And so 2024 rolls around. I voted for Biden. I got my friends to vote for Biden. Donald Trump wins anyway. So now we've got a second Trump term. And boy, if you thought the first one was bad, Jesus Christ, this second Trump term has been an absolute nightmare. Kamala, it was technically at the end, Biden dropped out. It was Kamala Harris versus Donald Trump, but she didn't do anything to differentiate herself. I literally just forgot it was Kamala Harris versus Donald Trump because she was there for 3 months. She lost the election and then she's gone. She went on a book tour, I think. That's it. At the start of 2025, I thought, man, Kamala Harris would have been a good president. It's a real shame we couldn't have had Kamala Harris as our president. It's a real shame that Republicans control both houses, the Senate and the House of Representatives. We got 47 Democratic senators. We're so close to having a majority of good senators. If we can get a couple more senators that are good, we could have a majority of good senators. 47 out of 100. Maybe soon we can get like 50 or 53 or 56 out of 100, and the majority can be good senators. And at the end of 2025, I realized Kamala Harris probably would have been a pretty forgettable, lackluster, shitty candidate that just kicked the can down the road, would have been maintaining the status quo until we all got pissed off enough to vote for somebody even worse than Donald Trump. Kamala Harris probably wouldn't have been all that great. Probably would have sucked. And over the last few months, I've watched as Democratic senators, those 47 or so senators I thought were good, they suck too. A lot of them keep on capitulating. They don't fight. They don't resist. And I watched the way they voted on things like the Laken Riley Act, the crypto bill. I looked at who was donating to all their campaigns, learned who was bankrolling them, and I sat down and I actually did some digging, and I realized, unfortunately, we don't have 47 good senators. We've only got about 5. Bernie Sanders, Chris Van Hollen, and maybe a few more, maybe Chris Murphy. Like, there's not a lot of good senators. Even from Michigan, we got Gary Peters and Elissa Slotkin. Boy, Elissa Slotkin sucks. I remember sitting next to my friend and telling him, I know you're normally a conservative guy, but trust me, Elissa Slotkin will be better than Mike Rogers or whoever she was going up against. You can put your faith in me that Elissa Slotkin will be good. And boy, was that an embarrassment, the way that she conducts herself and completely votes in line with ways that she really should not be. Voted for the Laken Riley Act, voted for cryptocurrency bills. I don't think I've ever hated Democrats, even when I was more of a conservative, more of a Republican voter myself. I didn't really hate Democrats until I started to view myself as a Democrat. And then I realized, wow, all of our leaders are weak and pathetic, and I despise them. I've never really hated a politician until I saw just how spineless a lot of these Democratic leaders are. They just want to be bureaucrats. They don't want to actually lead. They don't want to cause waves. They'll put out a strongly worded letter. They'll be all prim and proper about things. They'll call for reform. They'll pass bills in appropriations committees behind back doors and stuff like that. They'll play the system. And, I kind of just want blood. I kind of want to, I want to see my Democratic leaders fight. And I haven't. And it's pissing me off because I know how much damage is being done when they're not. Which brings me to today. We might have a government shutdown in 1 week because of the murders ICE is doing in Minnesota. People being executed out in the streets. Not great. Not great. So that seems like it's been enough to get some senators to stand their ground. But, I saw this happen a couple months back. It seemed like the Democrats were finally getting some courage, finally showing some backbone. They had victories, the wind at their sails, and then they gave it up because they suck. And Chuck Schumer sucks. So unfortunately, yeah, we've got a lot of work to do. It's difficult because we're not just fighting the Republicans and the billionaires that bankroll them that are super powerful, but also the Democrats that are, the majority of them need to be thrown out, taken out with the trash. For example, we've got a Senate election coming up here in Michigan this year. It's a choice between 3 candidates. We got Mallory McMorrow, Abdul El-Sayed, and Haley Stevens. And I think Mallory McMorrow might not have enough support just yet. It's basically, last I saw, a two-way race between Stevens and El-Sayed. So on one hand, you got Stevens, who has millions of dollars from lobbying groups and foreign interests. She represents the status quo. She doesn't want universal health care. She'll put out meek messages like, oh yeah, we'll offer a government option. It'll be optional. It's like, cool. More compromise, because that's worked so well for us the last however many years. And then you got Abdul El-Sayed, who calls what's going on in Gaza a genocide, the first one to call it that. And he wants Medicare for all, and he hasn't taken any lobbyist money, no corporate money, no super PAC money. Seems like a pretty clear-cut choice between shitty Democrat and good Democrat. We'll see who wins. Is this going to be another 2016 for Michigan, where you've got good Democratic candidate and bad Democratic candidate, and bad Democratic candidate wins and ultimately loses to Republican candidate who makes life worse for everyone? Is that how we're doing it? How long are we going to do this? I don't know. What's clear to me, though, is that we've got many years of work ahead of us. This doesn't end with Trump. This doesn't end in 2028. It's going to take the rest of our lives. We're going to have to spend the rest of our lives trying to fix our shitty politics and getting rid of all these awful, awful politicians. Not looking forward to it, but I'm living in America. I'm not going anywhere, and we got to do this. We got to fight. We got to take this fight. Even if it's not a fight we want, it's a fight we get. So sorry it's taken me so long to get on the same page as a lot of you. It is 2026, and I no longer consider myself independent or progressive or even liberal. I'm definitely a leftist now. Yeah, I've been pretty radicalized, seeing how shitty every politician seems to be and how weak they all are and how corrupt they all are. I'm hopeful that I can use this channel to highlight politics in Michigan, because politics is largely local. I didn't really know who my state senators, state representatives were until last year. I started going out, meeting them, talking to them, learning who they are, seeing which ones I agree with and which ones I think need to be replaced. And I will probably be spending a lot more time talking about that on this channel in the future. I'll also probably talk about national politics from time to time, because I do like pointing out when things are really, really good. We need good news, and people like Zoran Mamdani from New York, even though it's not Michigan politics, it makes this Michigander feel good. So I'm happy to see New York elect a good mayor, and I'm hopeful that it's the start, just the first election of many, many, many really good elections as we throw out the trash and bring some good, fresh blood into our politics. A lot of work ahead.